Well, Dave, I was so happy to hear you mention the Mummer album, because I feel like it's kind of a neglected or underappreciated XTC gem. You know, it has Beating of Hearts, it has Love on a Farm Boy's Wages, but it also has things like Human Alchemy, Lady Bird, and one of my all-time favorites, Me and the Wind.
Oh, yeah. Me and the Wind was, I always thought it would sound a bit like a Jethro Tull song for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, I really liked the approach. Well, it was a bit of an odd time because we just lost Terry. Terry Chambers had decided to quit and gone to live in Australia. So we were having to, rethink everything. We were lucky to get Peter Phipps to drum with us. Did a fantastic job. We'd found him with, he was playing with a group called Random Hold, who just supported us on some gigs in 1979 around Christmas time. And Pete, of course, had been a member of the Glitter Band, Gary Glitter's outfit in the 70s. And I remember thinking, Pete's doing prog now, so he's... But wouldn't it be so great to have one of the actual Glitter Band drummers on our record in place of Terry? Because it was all that sort of four on the floor dance thing that he did so brilliantly. And so, yeah, Pete was happy to come along, and we got along fine. We worked well together, and he, but at the same time, Andy had decided that he didn't want the drums to sound like Terry. He wanted Pete to play in his own style, and he also wanted them to be, smaller than previously. I mean, he'd gone from telling Hugh Padgham that he wanted the drums bigger than the biggest thing you could imagine, to now sort of, having more nuanced and detailed drumming. But Pete was more than man enough for the job. So there was that. The group sounded different. We had a different producer in Steve Nye, who wasn't, the sort of fellow who was up for noisy, clattery sounds. Quite the reverse. He was brought in because we loved the sound of tin drum. Steve Nye was an interesting fellow, a very, very dry sense of humour. You could never, and of course Andy, being completely the opposite, he's like sort of found him a bit grumpy, when really Steve was just who he was, and the way he kind of, it was just his sense of humour at work. There was a little bit of friction between Andy and Steve, and Steve kind of, I think he kind of lost patience occasionally with Andy, particularly when the album was being mixed, because Andy would come in and start picking holes in everything after Steve had been working all day. He'd come in the evening to assess the situation, and he would always find something he didn't like. I still remember Steve sort of with this careworn look on his face, and he'd take his right arm and wipe all the faders back to zero.
Oh, wow.
And it was a little bit fraught at times, and in fact we had to in the finish, we took the record to a couple of other producers to record extra tracks and to remix it. It wasn't the most happy of recording experiences, I have to say, but like you said, some good songs. Some good songs, and I think it's unread. We didn't. The single we put out, "Great Fire," which I thought was a really great song, but it wasn't really single material. Somehow, it didn't get playlisted. It didn't get. It wasn't the follow-up to "Senses Working Overtime" that everyone hoped it would be. So that was really, well. Then we put out "Love on a Farm Boy's Wages." It's got a lot of radio play, but again, didn't sell. But I thought both of those songs are worth the entry fee on their own. Such is good. There's nothing, the writing standards hadn't diminished in any way.
No.
So, but it would be lovely to get the album remixed and remastered by Stephen Wilson. We've been looking for the master tapes for a long, long time. They've just been lost. And it sticks in my craw, the fact that recording contracts, when you read them, it's constantly set out that the recordings shall remain the property of the record company, blah, 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 all rights reserved. We've got no rights at any of this stuff at all. Everything belongs to the company. They couldn't even look after their own fucking property. Nobody knows where these tapes are. Nobody seems to care. And if ever an album warranted a decent remix and a surround mix, that's the one. That and Big Express, both those records, in my view, could really do the spruce up.
Well, those are two that I put together as kind of neglected XTC albums. Am I incorrect that XTC was producing a bit on their own during Mummer?
Well, we'd always kind of gone into the studio having produced or pre-produced in rehearsal. So everything was kind of mapped out, really. The producer's job, at least as far as Andy was concerned, was to get his ideas on tape. Could have done it with a cooperative engineer like Hugh, for example. I mean, that's how English Settlement was done. The band kind of decided how the record was going to sound, but we knew that we needed Hugh there to get the sounds on tape and to mix them onto the master reel as well. So it wasn't that we took control and did everything ourselves. It's just that the whole business of production credit, it's a flaky area. Where does the producer stop and the artist begin, or vice versa? It's a difficult one, and I think certainly in Andy's case, where he's so sure of where he wants his music to go, how he wants it to sound, the producer's job is kind of it's quite an easy job if you can get along with Andy.
Well, or any artist that feels they know what they want. The interesting thing, I always kind of modeled, having grown up being a huge Todd Rundgren fan, was his approach was, if you know what you want, I can get it for you. And if you don't know what you want, I can give you something cool. And that seems like a way to go
That's
about.
Todd. Yeah.
Yeah. And may not always.
And Todd.
Well,
I was going to say, Todd is one of those producers that I have, that what you've just told me absolutely sums him up as a producer, because he always did. He always had something. He'd let you carry on and carry on and carry on. You go. But the minute you got stuck or couldn't decide, he'd have a great idea. It was always a great idea, or every time. So he'd quietly, do what you asked him to do, and he'd go ahead. Yeah, well, that sounds okay. That's fine. And when you got stuck, he would be there to help you out.
I'd love to hear an example, Dave.
God bless him. Yeah, he did that.
I'd love to hear an instance of that if you can recall.
Well, I would say the song That's Really Supergirl, where we'd run it a few times, and I don't think any of us were really 100% into it. And we'd made a few attempts to I can't remember. I wish I'd kept a diary, because a lot of the sessions I did keep a day-to-day diary, but I think I was getting a bit blasé about the recording process at that point, and didn't bother. I wish I had. But basically, he assumed control of the entire track, and he did all the keyboards. Andy, Prairie and Andy, Prairie did drums, Andy did a little bit of guitar. I think I played a couple of guitar chords, and I did the solo in the middle, and that was it. Everything else was Todd. And he kind of brought the song back put it back on the table whereas before it had been sort of almost ready to be thrown in the bin. So he rescued that song.
You know, I've been fortunate enough to get called by Todd on and off for the last 10 years to play drums for him when Prairie's not available. And, you know, growing up as a fan of his work and now, and, you know, being able to perform with him, he's just always sounds so great. You know, we've done shows where he has bronchitis and he soldiers through, but I mean, for the most part, it's all original keys and he's singing his ass off and, you know, just always putting new music together. So I know that you were a fan before you worked with him. You know, what were your first Todd listening experiences? Could you recall that?
The first listening experience, I think, probably was, again, going back to Bob Harris' sounds of the 70s. He would always play the latest albums. He'd take a track off whatever was out at the time. And the double album, Todd, had just been released. It had been the early months of 74. And he played The Last Ride. And I thought, oh, man, this is a song. I got it. And my brother was listening as well. And he said, oh, that's great. I'm going to get the album. So Ian bought the album. And we listened to that. I wasn't completely bowled over by it because I thought there was rather too much filler on it. You know,
there's a lot
out of the chakra we go, and shaft goes to outer space. But there was enough there to think, yeah, this is an interesting artist. I shall be returning at some point. And then when I joined XTC, their sound guy, a guy called Steve Warren, who's a local chap who was part of the band from the very beginning. He was a huge Todd fan and Utopia. He was always trying to turn me on to Utopia. I said, yes, Steve, I'll get to it at some point, mate. Just let it lie for the time being. I'll come round to it. You know, I remember when another live came out, David, he's got this live album. You've got to hear it. You've got to hear it. Later, Steve. And then we were on tour in Australia, and Steve said to, I think it was Steve, or it might have been a journalist, someone had a cassette of Hermit of Mink Hollow. And I had my Sony Walkman, brand new Sony Walkman. I was listening to everything I could find. So someone bunged this cassette at me, Hermit of Mink Hollow. And from the moment that record started till the end of the tape, that was it. I was gone. And from that point forward, that was the tipping point. I went back and album by album, I gradually gathered together all his material and just became totally besotted. I just thought, well, music now, it's in the 90s, it's just turned into 1980. Music isn't getting any better, really, and not really. Going to have to go back to the 70s and pick up on the stuff that I neglected at the time just for some refreshment. And that was basically, you know, he pretty much saved the 1980s for me musically.
Well, he has a string of good things there too. There's Hermit, then there's also the a cappella record.
Oh yeah, the a cappella record was. Well, I've told this story a dozen times. When we went to Mink Hollow to do the album, and we were billeted in the guest house. Did you ever go there?
Not while it stood, no.
Well, they had this guest house, and we all we were really tired by the time we got there. And so it was like Andy and Colin went to look for the best bedroom, whereas I'd seen this room on the ground floor and threw my suitcase in there and said, right, bugger off, I'm going to sleep. And anyway, when I woke up the next day, I noticed that there was a turntable deck in the room and a radio, a nice big double bed. And I realized I'd lucked out with the best room. So anyway, on the turntable was a white label vinyl disc. And so I put it on, and sure enough, it was a test pressing of a cappella. And I thought, I wonder if Todd knows it's here. I'm having that. So I nicked it and took it home. But he never mentioned it, so I figured, yeah, he doesn't want that. He's heard that enough times. But what an astonishing achievement that is.
Well, and the writing, you know, I mean,
yes.
You know, I would say this. I would say, for me, the buried track on Mink Hollow is Hurting for You.
Yes.
which has a killer guitar solo by Todd. And then Pretending to Care on...
Oh, my goodness. Isn't that just about the best vocal you ever heard? Because I always think Todd kind of picked up the ball that Brian Wilson dropped in 1969 and just ran like hell with it. For me, he is as important as Brian was.
And he has that huge jump on the out chorus of Pretending to Care.
Oh, geez.
Right? So, yeah, you think of like Surf's Up by Brian Wilson and Pretending to Care by Todd.
But it still gives me goosebumps every time I listen to that.
You know who was
Amazing.
a big fan of that song? Not surprisingly, maybe, Alan Holdsworth and Gary Husband. Big fans of that.
Yeah. Well, anyone who loves music surely must be affected by that. It's just, but like you say, the writing, most artists, I think, would have been very fearful of not adding instruments to those songs. But the fact that he was able to still make them sound really, really vibrant and meaningful without the use of any instruments at all, and yet they're still fantastic songs.
Well, and then we should say also that it's a sampling record, so it's sampling vocal sounds and using them through the sampling keyboard. Also, Dave, I was lucky enough that I saw the a cappella tour where he took a choir out.
Oh, did you?
So he took a vocal group out. I think there's evidence of this on live recording somewhere. And yeah, he was playing that material with a vocal group live when a cappella came out.
Wow.
Also, by the way, vocal arranger. Let's talk, for Todd, vocal arranging.
Yeah. Well, he had me singing, which is rare. I mean, I don't sing, but he had me singing these high harmonies to things like not Summer's Cauldron, Ballet for a Rainy Day and Dying and stuff like that. And it's not something I was used to doing. He said, no, come on, it's cool. It's an effect we can use. It's a really nice effect. So I'm struggling with these high lines, and it's all very breathy and there's no real power or tone to it. But afterwards, I said, we had this running joke in the studio. I said, Todd, whatever this album ends up being called, I wanted the suffix to read, featuring the sound of Dave Gregory, just like the Four Seasons did with Frankie Valli. And he made me laugh. And he autographed one of my records. Dave, you'll always be the sound to me.
That's good. Dave the Sound Gregory.
Who else?
So it's...
Yes, 25 o'clock.
It's the 35th anniversary of 25 o'clock.
Yes. Time for a Dukes revival, I reckon.
Listen, that Dukes stuff...
That would be something.
Oh, my goodness. And I guess this was a good introduction because I feel like we had to talk about John Leckie.
Let's talk about John Leckie. He's the most, or should I say, the least heralded genius I know, because everything he touches, he just brings music out of people without even trying. I don't know what the secret is. He's such a nice man. He knows what he loves his music, but he's not in any way pretentious or even aware of perhaps what his achievements have been, or if he is, he's very, very he doesn't shout about it.
Well, he goes back to Space Odyssey, is that right?
No, that was Gus Dudgeon did Space Odyssey.
Okay, but he's involved with early Beatles sessions.
Yes, well, he did. I think he left school and went to work at Abbey Road as a T-boy tape-op. That would have been, I think, the summer of 1970, and I think the first project he worked on was Atom Heart Mother, Pink Floyd. So he was like tape-op on that record, and then did a kind of, he worked on John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band album. And just a whole bunch of stuff that came through. I'm still finding records with his name on now. John, I didn't know you worked on this. You never said.
Yeah.
But no, he is a brilliant sound man. What a great guy. And he's still busy. People still ask him to work for them, and he has this little online radio program that he does now, and it's all old blues music from the 40s and 50s. I didn't know he was a blues fan. It was the last thing I would have expected from John. But no, he loves Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, all the old blues legends. That's where John's head is.
And so you really got into the whole world of the psychedelic music when you came to do the Dukes. In fact, I happen to know that it was one of the first things that Andy and you had talked about when you joined XTC. Is that right?
Before I joined the band, yeah. I mean, I went to, this is another story that's been going around forever, but basically Andy had a little party in his flat when Go 2 was released. And they were about to go off to Europe to tour with the Talking Heads. This was in November of 78. It was certainly the back end of 1978. And we'd been drinking and chatting all night. There was a bunch of people there. Most of the people had left. And just as I was about to leave, he said, I've had this idea, and remember, this is 1978. I want to form this little side project, of doing some psychedelic acid rock and stuff like that, some real old psych stuff like, early Sid's Floyd and Keith West Tomorrow and all those daft bands from the time when we were at Sky. And I was thinking to myself at the time, this is the most uncool thing he could even be suggesting at this point. All that stuff was dead and buried.
That's interesting, Dave. Yeah, because at that time, nobody's fetishing that stuff, really?
Not at all. Not even slightly. It was gone, forgotten. Apart from the Beatles, their stuff was still fair game, but everybody else, no. It was out. And so I kind of said, well, yeah, and I'll dig out my big muff pedal and see if they still make batteries for it and see what, would just give us the word. One time went by and didn't hear anything else. I just thought it was Andy, another of his high-spirited, daft ideas. And eventually, in the fall of 1984, the opportunity did arise quite unexpectedly, and so it was like, well, who are we gonna get to drum on this thing?
Right.
And I said, well, my brother drums. He's into 60s beat music. He played a lot of gigs. He knows the music. I'm sure he'd be overjoyed to join us.
Yeah, so your brother Ian Gregory was on all over on that stuff. And you were in sessions dressed in full regalia, is that right?
Well, no. Well, we sort of did. We all brought records from our collections. We lined them up behind the console there as a source of inspiration. And John did the same. And so we had a lot of, and John would bring in, incense sticks and stuff like that. Totally daft. Really, we just wanted to enter the whole silly spirit of the whole project, and just immerse ourselves in nostalgia.
Where did Lord Cornelius Plum come from?
Well, I don't know. It was just we were all having silly pseudonyms. I liked the Lord prefix, and I liked the Plum thing, which seemed to be a very typical kind of daft English hippie name. So I figured Cornelius was a reasonable epithet. Who knows? It was just daft. We were just being silly.
What were the keyboards that you were using on the Dukes?
Well, we would have had, yeah, I'll tell you what it was. Roland JX3P with a little PG200 programmer, which I think they later sold with some guitar synth thing that they manufactured, same programmer. Difficult to find now, very expensive, you can find one. I still have it upstairs. I haven't plugged it in for years and years. I used to have to save the patches. I think there were 16 programmable patches in addition to the factory settings. And then you would have to hook up a cassette recorder and record the data from your own homemade patches if you wanted to use them again. That's probably one reason why I haven't hooked it up for a while. But yeah, that's what we used, the JX3P, and we got a really, really very nice Rick Wright Farfisa organ out of it. Which
that's what that organ is? Oh, okay. And Mellotron.
Yeah. Mellotron was a real Mellotron. And we bought, we ordered a new rack of tapes, 3 sounds on a tape, and you could specify which sounds you wanted and they'd make them up for you. The factory was still going at the time. And so we ordered it, what are our favorite Mellotron sounds? Cello, flute, strings, in addition to augmented brass, choir, and augmented strings that were part of the original Mellotron. And the story goes, and it's absolutely true, that while I was, we'd ordered this rack of tapes in a hurry, they called us to say that they were ready for collection. So I drove to Birmingham to collect them. And when I got back to the studio, Andy had written this song, "Is the Mole from the Ministry," which was the kind of keystone of that whole EP. He did it in an afternoon. It is
such a thing, yes.
So that was, we got to work on it as soon as we loaded the flute, the rack of tapes, the flute on it into the Mellotron. As soon as that was in the machine, off we went. And we did it, the whole thing, in 24 hours. So it's fresh as fresh could be.
I don't know.
I'm really proud of everything we did on that record. At 25 o'clock, I just think to have been able to created something like that in the time that we did. And without John Leckie, it wouldn't have happened, because he knew exactly where we were going with it, and he was overjoyed. He hadn't made music like that since he'd been, an apprentice. So it was as much a thrill for him as it was for us. And while we weren't expecting anything to come of it career-wise, we just thought, well, we've got this. This is just fun in a sleeve, when the record finally was released and pressed up. We took the tapes into Virgin, or John Leckie, I should say, took it to Simon Draper at Virgin, and he just flipped. He was overjoyed, and he called everyone in Virgin into his office to listen to it. And John was sort of shuffling there, very embarrassed. So we knew that we'd done something right as far as Virgin were concerned, because they were giving up on us. I think at the time they were sort of ready to wash their hands of the whole XTC thing.
I don't really want to go there, but I just say that we've always been perplexed as your fans of the neglect that was at the hands of Virgin. But maybe we shouldn't dwell on that. I was also wondering if you had memories of the Mole video session.
Yeah, I do have memories of that. We had an ally in a fellow who worked at BBC Television in Bristol called Andy Batten Foster, and he presented a program called RPM. It was an arts program, local network arts program, and he was a big XTC fan, and he was always calling Andy for interviews and what have you. So when 25 O'Clock came out and Mole from the Ministry was chosen as a single, somehow he coerced BBC in Bristol to do a little promo film for us, free of charge, so they could show it on their program on RPM. Lo and behold, it came to pass. We went to this place called Nailsea Court, which is a suburb of Bristol, where Adge Cutler comes from, incidentally. Heard of him?
Ivor Cutler?
No, Adge Cutler. A very different fish altogether. No, all right. No, well, we won't go.
Okay.
Maybe you should check out Adge Cutler's catalogue.
Okay.
Or maybe not. Anyway, we were able to avail ourselves of this what looked like a stately home. And they had a nice lawn. The only thing that spoiled it was the weather was rubbish. It was really cloudy. And we didn't get that lovely sunny English summer thing that we were hoping to find. And then the costume department at the BBC sent along some daft animal costumes, and a couple of the production assistants were persuaded to jump into these things and leap around. And it was a fun day. It was a really fun day. And it got shown, I think, after RPM had shown it, it then turned up on the whistle test and started to ask themselves, who are these guys?
Right, so that's my question.
Yeah,
was it kept secret for a minute?
For about a minute. We couldn't really stifle our grins for very long.
But people would ask you and you deny it, is that correct?
No, not really, because I can remember Andy doing some promo stuff, and he would remember there was an interview on Radio 1 one Saturday afternoon, and he insisted on, having his voice put through a vocoder, and when the presenter was asking him these questions, he wanted to psychedelicize his responses. So stupid.
Or when they'd have someone in shadow and they'd put the vocoder because they don't want to be recognized.
Exactly, yeah, that kind of thing, but in this psychedelic way, because it wasn't just a straight vocoder. There was somebody there tweaking it, as he was speaking, adjusting the pitch. I think it was probably an EMS. What's that thing they made? The Eventide digital delay. I think there was a pitch shift thing in there. I think that's probably what it was. It was all jolly good fun, and in fact, I sent a copy of 25 O'Clock to Todd's office, his management, because we'd met him, you see, earlier. Yeah, that's right, because it came out a year after Deface the Music. And I put a little note inside and said, Todd, I hope this reaches you, but I'm a huge fan of Deface the Music. I thought you did a brilliant job, made me laugh, fantastic. How about this? Here we are as the Dukes of Stratosphear. Well, I didn't hear anything back from him. Though I should mention that we'd met very briefly a couple of years previously, because we played a sold-out show in Chicago, April 1981, on the last American tour that we did. We played the Park West in Chicago to a sellout crowd. It's one of my favourite venues, actually. It's such a great atmosphere in there always. Chicago was always very friendly towards us. So we'd just done this amazing show, and we were in the dressing room, toweling off, and tour manager stuck his head around the door and said, guys, Todd Rundgren's here, he wants to see you. We're busy. Todd Rundgren is outside, he wants to see you, he wants to know if you can talk. Are you serious? So next thing I know, right before me, my hero and his girlfriend in my dressing room. So that was a moment.
Yeah.
That's something I'll never forget. I remember at the time I had a full beard. I'd grown a beard. I said, Todd, I can't believe it. I'm your biggest fan. How are you? Well, it's nice to see you. His first words to me, what are you, incognito? So that was my first exposure to his sarcasm.
Yeah, and it's always appearance first comment.
Yes.
I've run into, John McLaughlin has done that to me several times. Oh, you
Really?
changed your hair.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like when I started doing this hair, he said, "You look like a 16th century composer." Thanks, John.
Have you worked with John recently?
No, but I've done this Mahavishnu repertoire project for many years,
Yeah.
and so we developed a friendship through that. Well, through his kind wife Ina, who said you should listen to these guys. They're serious about this, and so
Have to be.
yeah, yeah. Well, it wasn't going to be like a pickup band or a lead sheet gig. So, but yeah, we did everything from the beginning to the end of the group, apart from the orchestral stuff, and then we also did the pre Mahavishnu McLaughlin tunes like Extrapolation and Devotion. And then we did post Mahavishnu John McLaughlin tunes like New York on My Mind or Friendship, any of those. And so, yeah, John came around a couple of years ago for his farewell to America playing the Mahavishnu stuff. And that was pretty incredible because, he had felt that we kind of kept the flame, the intermounting flame going for most of the 2000s. We started in 2000 and finished up around 2012, 13, something like that. And yeah, I mean, he must have been really important for you. And I'm curious, like, what is your first McLaughlin stuff?
Yeah. No. Well, again, I have to thank Andy. He was always a huge Tony Williams Lifetime fan. And he was trying to turn me on to this, the Extrapolation album. And I said, Andy, it's just kind of too far out for me. I'm not really a jazz. I don't really care for this kind of stuff, really. But, it was the same with Trout Mask Replica, which is another one that took a few years to sink in. That's another story. Anyway, I was in Swindon, and at the time, it was in 1972, Andy was working in a little record department in a department store in Swindon. I'd popped in there. I think I'd gone in to buy Jack Bruce's album, because I was late getting it, Harmony Row. I'm a huge Jack Bruce fan.
Huge.
And he said, "Oh, you sure you want this record?" He says, "It's very depressing. Look at this." I said, "No, it's Jack Bruce. I will end up loving it, whatever it sounds like." He said, "Okay, well, what about this album has just come in. Go in that." It was at the time when they had booths. You could go in and listen. He said, "Tell me what you think of this." So in I went, and what should come on? Meeting of the Spirits. What is this? So I'm there with my Jack Bruce album, no money. So Andy turned me on to the Intermounting Flame. I was hooked from the get-go. Suddenly, I finally found a way into this avant jazz music. And just the standard of everybody's playing on it, it was bizarre, just outrageous. I didn't believe it was even possible at that age, So I've been 19 years old. And a few weeks later, saved up a bit more money, and Richard Branson had this mail order record business where you could buy albums way cheaper than normal retail price, and I bought it from his shop, from his PO box. So that was one of the first albums I became seriously addicted to, not just hooked on. I just had to play it every day at least 3 times. And that was the summer of 1972 for me, just listening over and over and over to the music of God. That's how I heard it.
How did you feel about Birds of Fire?
I didn't like it as much because it wasn't so much of a shock. But I know that whereas there were a few scathing reviews of Intermounting Flame, but in some quarters saying, it's all technique, blah, blah, no substance, blah, blah. I thought, you people are full of shit. This is the music of the spheres. And then, of course, Birds of Fire comes out, and those same people saying, yeah, this is much better. Oh, yeah, this is how it should have been. This is how Intermounting Flame should have been. I was particularly, I liked it, but I wasn't as hooked on it as I had been on the previous album. And the the one thing I do remember from it is Billy Cobham's stunning, that press roll he does at the start of
One
side
word.
2.
Yeah.
One word. And
Yeah.
the whole performance throughout. And then the final track where it just keeps ascending and ascending and ascending.
Resolution, yeah. I also felt, that was something I heard again contemporaneously when I was 10. We had it on 8-track. So I also was very probably influenced by the Ken Scott production.
Yeah. Very, very professional and tidy. I think what I loved about the first album was that it sounded like it was live and done very quickly, and sort of like lightning captured in a milk bottle. I'd love to talk to Don Palouse at some point if he's still alive, and find out what the story was behind it, because it must have been such a thrill to have been in that room while that music was being made.
Well, it was loud, I'm sure. That record sounds like they were loud. It's funny. I was playing at a club in New York called Iridium, and Steve Miller was there. And I went back to talk to Steve Miller, and I said, Steve, there's I wish I could pull it out, because I found the advertisement for it. There was a triple bill at the Beacon Theater in 1971 or 2, and it's Cannonball Adderley Quintet, Steve Miller Band, and Mahavishnu Orchestra, and it's Mahavishnu probably in the middle. So I said, Steve, is this show that I've heard so much about, that was really a thing? He said, no, that was a tour. I took Cannonball and Mahavishnu out on a tour because I was trying to turn people on to jazz music. And I said, well, that's incredible. How did it go? Because you have Cannonball, then you have Mahavishnu, then you have Steve Miller Band. He said, well, Mahavishnu was too loud. And when I told John, you're just too fucking loud, John got mad at me.
That's interesting you should say that, because I saw them play at the Colston Hall in Bristol on the 1973 tour. It was the loudest concert I've ever been to. Painfully loud, but I was so transfixed, mainly with Billy Cobham. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I just couldn't believe it.
Sure.
But McLaughlin, it was just like a sheet of metal hammering into my ears, and it got in the way of the music, I have to say it.
Yeah. It was an edict, and I also found out that that Lifetime was really loud live.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this, I don't know how much you've heard about this, and I also was kind of curious on how loud XTC would have been on stage, but there was a thing in the post-Hendrix live world where they're very aware of it being super confrontational on stage, coming off the stage volume-wise. And that was considered, part and parcel of reaching an audience, I guess.
Well, I suppose it was all power, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The advent of the Marshall 100-watt stack, although I seem to remember McLaughlin was using a 50-watt head, but I've got a 50-watt head and it's unbearably loud. And so but then, it was the early days of amplified stage gear. So you had the PA coming through the PA as well. And it was unbearable. I would have enjoyed the gig so much more had it just been, 30 decibels quieter.
My wife still suffers from hearing loss from seeing Purple Mach 2, I think in like 72 or 73, and she remembers it. And I said, honey, Purple was in the Guinness Book of World Records that year for loudest band. You can look it up. Sorry that had to happen. People didn't know.
No, that's right.
You mentioned Richard Branson, and I found that interesting because I'm wondering to what degree the Branson picking up on the Canterbury thing for promoting that sort of range of music, was that something that was in your view?
Personally, I didn't care very much for that, what I called soft psych. It was a little bit, it didn't really rock. it wasn't a really, I couldn't hear too much. It didn't really light my fire. But there were some other bands like Hatfield in the North, and a band that they were an interesting band. And Dave Stewart, National Health. Dave's a friend now. I've known him for a number of years. He's a super nice guy and a brilliant musician.
Brilliant.
And so when I actually discovered National Health as a result of our friendship, because I was a bit, sort of hadn't really kept up with his work, I was delighted to discover what a brilliant album that was. And so he's the one. If there's an indoor to that stuff, he'd open it for me. He'd be the one to open it for me. But I never really, at the time, mid-70s, I wasn't hugely into it. I must be honest.
But yeah, that's some other stuff that holds up too. The Dave Stewart, National Health. Just Dave Stewart in general, I just feel like anything he touches, there's just a level of musicality and beauty to it. The stuff with Egg, even as far back as Egg, which is contemporaneous with The Nice. Man, just the best organ sounds,
Well, he gifted me with this. They remastered the stuff that he did with. Do you remember Uriel, the band that he had with Steve Hillage prior to Egg, or around about the same time?
Yeah.
And I got totally into that. In fact, Steve Hillage's guitar, to my ears, never sounded better than on that record. And it's the sound of 1969. If I had to sum up what 1969 sounded like, listen to that record. And Dave tells this amusing story that they had a day to do it in, and they had to be out of the studio by midnight, or they had to stop playing by a certain time on the clock. And he was the last track that was recorded on that record was a long extended jam piece, and he had his eye on the clock and he was looking around at the band, and he said as soon as the second hand hit 12, off his hands came. The record was done.
I like that. That's it's process music.
Yeah, indeed. But I think I'm sad that didn't get a wider hearing when it was released. I know it was done on a dodgy little independent label. I don't think they ever saw any money from it, or when it finally was released, it was being put out on somebody's label they'd never even heard of. And Dave had to take some steps to get the rights back or something. I'm not sure of the full story. Anyway, he got it remastered along with a bunch of what's the three-piece band that he had? What was that with
Egg?
But it was Egg, wasn't it? Yeah, of course. It's been a long day, yeah, Greg. Sorry, yes. Egg. And it's great. It's really, really good stuff.
It is. It's fantastic. And I think that National Health should be considered a flagship of the entire movement.
Yeah. I know for a fact that Danny Manners, the keyboard player, who also has just left Big Big Train, who is a brilliant musician and a really versatile. I mean, he was our Tony Banks, really, to be perfectly honest. He really did take us to another level. But I know that one of his Desert Island discs is the National Health. That track, is it Roads? Something Roads.
Tenemus Roads,
That's it, Tenemus Roads. Which is
that's the anthem, if you were to ask me.
Yeah.
Dave, I just have enjoyed talking to you so much, but I can't let you go without talking about Captain Beefheart.
Okay.
Well,
who's my mentor? It has to be Andy Partridge. He's the one that turns me on to all this oddball stuff. He's been selling Trite-Mouse Replica to me whenever we bumped into each other in town as kids. This is in the late 60s when we were still youth club stage, and we'd bump into each other in Swindon on a Saturday afternoon, usually in a music shop, looking at guitars. And so, couldn't afford to buy anything. He would always come out with some he had me in stitches. Within 5 minutes of meeting Andy, he'd have me in stitches. He was such a funny guy. But at the same time, he would still be trying to push Trout Mask Replica onto me. He said, look at these song titles, look at this. And look at all the time. Yeah, this is an album. Just from the song titles alone, I need to hear this record. At some point, he loaned me Trout Mask Replica and Clear Spot. Here, Greggs, get a load of these. Tell me what you think. So Trout Mask goes on, and I'm hearing it for the first time. I'm thinking, well, this will straighten out soon. We'll get some songs. It'll all make sense. 4 sides of it. 4 sides. There was a funny section, featured Frank Zappa having a telephone conversation with Antennae Jimmy Siemens. That was funny. But the rest of it I just found kind of fathomless. And I said, so anyway, I'll put that to one side. And I thought, well, I'll come back to that later. Let's have a listen to Clear Spot. That was a completely different story. That was my indoor. And I thought, this is a great record. Why have I never heard this? The guitars, the musical arrangements, proper songs, kind of. Well, the vocals were okay. But the musical arrangements, the production, the way the guitars were engineered, Don Landy, another sound genius, in my opinion, a really, really one of America's best recording engineers ever, to these ears. It's how I like to hear guitars, just the right amount of compression, but still plenty of dynamics. And I just thought these Telecaster guitars have never sounded better. This is and the arrangements, everything sounds great. Vocals, okay, it's Beefheart, fair enough. We'll overlook that. And the lyrics are funny. They're good lyrics, very funny. So as a result of that, I fell in love with Clear Spot, and as a result of that, went back to Trout Mask, and over a period of about 10 years, I finally able to listen to it all the way through without having to have a break after each side. It's such, but that's not to say that it isn't a remarkable achievement.
Oh yeah,
I've read John French's book about its creation. I've read Bill's Lunar Notes book too. I know they were only kids, but why would you put up with all that for such a long time, and just to make a record as off the wall and off kilter as this? Why would you do it? And how could you do it? It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And the fact that Frank Zappa was prepared to helm it for them and actually put it out.
He did.
You have to hand it to Frank.
Yeah, we do. It stands as an achievement of independent music and the rugged American individualist, and certainly Zoot Horn Rollo, Bill Harkleroad, it makes a mark on music that would be eternal there. But it's funny that how he's sort of he's memorialized. I shouldn't say memorialized, but he's most famous for the long lunar note and Let It Float on Big Eye Beans from Venus, and that got him, so people know who Zoot Horn Rollo is. And of course, a huge part of his work is all over Lick My Decals Off, Baby.
Oh yes,
because that's
when he
sort of takes over,
Yeah. No, I've got Spotlight Kid. I think Andy gave me that.
But check out Lick My Decals Off, Baby, because that's a really neat follow-up to Trout Mask.
Right. Yes. No, I need to. There's a few records that I need to plug a few gaps in the timeline.
And so, were you keen to do the Ella Guru cover, or was that mostly Andy?
No, it was all Andy. I think he got Colin to play on it as well. No, I had no interest in that. It's too much work for too little reward. From my point of view, I just thought, this is this is very much Andy's pet project.
So
he did a brilliant job because he worked everything out, note for note.
Programmed the drum part.
Yeah.
But I always felt like there was a sort of utilization of sort of the way two guitars, bass, and drums set up in the Magic Band, and the way XTC sort of brought that into more, I don't know if it's mainstream or just more pop music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the effect of it would have rubbed off on Andy, no question about it. And if you listen to some of his solos, you could probably trace a lot of the odd, because he has this sort of way of using open strings, regardless of whether they're in the key of the song that he's playing in, and yet getting it to work. It always works. His solos, some of his guitar solos, particularly live, might to some ears have sounded a bit cacophonous, but to me, they were always appropriate. They always worked, and I could hear where it came from. You know, that kind of unfettered. Let's do this and see what happens. That kind of attitude, and it wasn't just deliberately trying to be musically obnoxious. There was serious intention behind it, and he made it work.
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly the complicated game solo.
Well, that was a bit of a fluke, actually. Be honest, because he didn't hear the backing track. He said, basically what was happening, we were trying to track the solo, but he had his amplifier so loud that it was leaking into his headphones. He couldn't hear the track. So he said, the track's actually putting me off. Why don't I put the headphones down? You point at me when I have to start playing, and I'll just run the guitar, and you stop the tape when the solo section is finished. And he did it in one pass. That's the solo. That's how he did it.
And he did the vocals in one pass also.
Oh, did he? I can't remember. But if you say so.
What's your favorite Andy guitar solo on record?
On record, I always liked what he played in Life Begins at the Hop. It's a really nicely constructed, very, very clever little solo.
It is.
Yeah, I'll require notice of that question, I think, Greg, because there's so many. There's a lot of lead stuff that he did that's because we didn't we were discouraged from indulging ourselves with our guitar solos, so they come in short bursts.
What's your favorite of yours?
My favorite of mine, I was pleased with the That Wave solo and all the guitar lines that go through that song, because that was the first one I actually had to sit down and write out and practice. Oh. The others were far more straightforward. Rocket from a Bottle, I was always pleased with that. It's only recently people started noticing it. You know, I thought, well, Rocket from a Bottle I always thought was a potential single. Nobody else seemed to think so. I thought, well, I've got that guitar solo, that's mine. Now people are starting to pick up on it. I've seen it mentioned a few times, social media. And I also liked Supergirl solo that I played on Eric Clapton's guitar, Todd's guitar, I should say.
Which has it has that run from Freak Parade from the first Utopia record, Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Huh.
No, it wasn't Freak Parade. It was Magic Dragon Theatre.
Okay. But you know, it's funny because Freak Parade has a similar motif.
Oh, I dare say it does. Oh, that part, yeah. So it does. Yeah, I missed that.
maybe recycling or something there. But Dave, what a thrill to speak with you. You know, I held you just in the highest echelon of all the musicians and guitarists. I mean, I'm a guitar geek, even as a drummer. You know, drums and guitar, it's a thing. And so, you know, being able to chat with you, and, you know, I big shout out to Mike Keneally, our friend, for getting us together, you know, and but I hold you, you know, there with Mike and Zoot Rollo and Andy and Todd, and just feel just a connection with all of this world that we're talking about with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. It's a shame, really, that I don't feel that I really deserve to be where I am. I've been lucky, been incredibly lucky. I've had some lucky musical breaks and tried to make the most of them. But really, I'm slowing down now. So I'm having to sort of look at things in the past tense. It's nice looking back. It's much nicer looking back on my time in XTC and all the other bands that I've been in. And quite often it was at the time. Plus, I think social media has had a huge effect on all of us in terms of, the feedback we get from audiences. It's because in the old days, you might play a show to 1,000 people in a room and they'd all applaud and you'd play your encore and then you'd go back to your hotel room and that would be the end of that. You wouldn't hear anything from anybody else again. You had no idea really whether what you'd done had any lasting effect on it or changed anybody's feelings or opinions or their lives. Now with Facebook and all the other media streaming and everything, there is now feedback from fans, people whose lives you've changed, and you suddenly think, well, maybe what I was doing had an effect after all, because it didn't feel like it at the time. Particularly as, there was nothing, we weren't really being paid for our work. We were out there having fun and hoped maybe some people would remember in time what we'd done, how they were feeling when they saw us play. But it's just there was no guarantee that you were going to be rewarded in any way at all. So it's nice now, for all its faults, the internet is providing this sounding board, and you'll occasionally get trolled. That's all right, you can put up with that. I was going to say, by and large, I think that social media is a good thing for people such as myself whose best years are behind them.
Well, also just, that it connects people, best case scenario, connects people, and we can share all of this great music, and that, I'm doing it with my students, but, the people are sharing it with each other. Young people are listening to your music now. You've given so much joy to people, and that you I hope will feel rightfully proud of, because there's so much negativity in the world and there's so much bullshit, but we can always count on XTC to put a smile on our face and give us a thrill, give us a chuckle. I mean, it's just timeless. And as I said, I've been listening for 25 years. I was a little late to the party, but I raised my son on XTC, who now you've met, and and just so really just to say thank you, Dave, for so much happiness and so much great music and just great vibes. XTC, when there wasn't always really much of a dark side to it. I felt like it was affirming kind of music.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Greg. That's very kind, and I'm glad that we've had an effect on you. Obviously, that's great, and I would love to actually attend one of your gigs at some point. And that's what I've seen online, especially I saw the little club gig you did with Mike and Doug Lunn. I was really impressed with that, really impressed. Anyone who can keep up with Mike Keneally and follow what he's doing it's got full marks in my book, that's for certain. But it's been a joy meeting you and speaking with you, Greg, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Dave. Happy holidays to you and your family. Please give my regards to EI Owen.
Okay.
And really all the best. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And it's just been an overwhelming response to the podcast, and I really appreciate everybody that's been commenting and sharing what we're doing. We're trying to do something really fun here, and I think it's working out so far if we can talk with people like Dave Gregory. So Dave, be well, stay safe. Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
man. Same to you. Yeah. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All the best. Cheerio.